Hi, this is Dr. Joshua Durham, Family Medicine. Today we're going to have a discussion on fat. There are three types of fat. You have polyunsaturated fatty acids, which I call PUFAs. You have saturated fat, and you got monounsaturated fat. So let's talk about polyunsaturated fats first. I think this is probably the most important one for people to understand. These are your omega-6 and your omega-3 fats. Okay? The other name for omega-6 is linoleic acid, which if you're one of my patients, you've heard a lot about this. But I want to try to explain to you what's going on in your body when you have this intake of these different fats. But what we need to understand to start with is the polyunsaturated fats, these are the unstable fats. So if you remember, the U in PUFA stands for unstable. What does that mean? That means that these fats are more prone to oxidation, which is where free radicals will interact with the molecule and damage it or change it. And that is a big deal, as we'll learn going forward. So in the wild, if you were to check a human's omega-6 to 3 ratio before the 18th century, it was somewhere around 2 to 1. Okay? If you fast forward to today, the average American sits at an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 20 to 1. So how did that happen? Well, in the wild, we primarily got omega-6 from nuts and seeds. Okay, but in the mid to late 18th century, early 19th century, they started making these things called seed oils. These are like your soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil, vegetable oil. Okay, and without testing what these do to humans, they marketed a campaign to put them in our food source and then basically demonize the animal fat that our ancestors have eaten for thousands of generations. And so we went from having this ratio of 2 to 1 to 20 to 1. Now, saturated fat, that usually comes from like your butter and your red meat. And it is fully saturated. So that means it is stable. It is the least likely to oxidize spontaneously. And then you've got monounsaturated fat, and this means that the mono stands for one double bond. So the more double bonds you have in the chemical structure, the more unsaturated it is and the more unstable it becomes. And it can interact with free radicals. So the monounsaturated fats are more stable than the polyunsaturated fats. And then saturated fat is the most stable. So if you were going to cook high heat with any of these, you would not want to use polyunsaturated fats. And unfortunately, when you go get your fries from the restaurants, this is exactly what they're cooking, and it's these polyunsaturated fats. So the monounsaturated fat would be like olive oil, if I didn't say that. Okay, and what I wanted to show you is what these different fats are doing to your metabolism, your appetite, and those kinds of things. So in every cell in your body, you have this little football-shaped thing called the mitochondria. The fat comes in and out comes ATP, okay? This is like the powerhouse of the cell. So we want to know, like, what is these fats doing to our mitochondria output? What are they doing to our appetite? What are they doing to our body temperature? And our body fat and our liver fat. This is where it kind of gets interesting. So, when you eat excessive polyunsaturated fats and you get your ratio up to this high, what's happening is it is decreasing your mitochondrial output. It is increasing your appetite. One of the metabolites of these polyunsaturated fats will actually directly stimulate the THC receptors in the brain and literally cause the munchies. It lowers your body temperature, increases your fat mass, increases your liver fat. Now, the saturated fat, interestingly, increases your mitochondrial output, lowers your appetite, increases your body temperature through thermogenesis, lowers your fat, lowers your liver fat. And then the monounsaturated fat is kind of the neutral stepchild. Nobody really argues about this one. The ones they argue about is the saturated fat and the polyunsaturated fat. But your fat cells do like the mono. Your liver fat can get full of the mono. But the two primary ones that everybody argues over are these two. So let's talk a little bit more about this process. So if you look at mammalian animals and the physiology of hibernation, what you find is these animals will go seek out excessive omega-6 so that they can get their omega-6 to 3 ratio up above 8 to 1. And when that happens, they start to decrease their energy output. They start to increase their appetite, lower their body temperature, and get fat for the winter so that they can go and enter hibernation. And I think a similar process is going on in us humans, and that it's been driven by these seed oils and this imbalance. And so my goal for my patients is to try to get this back to a normal human level. And that's an extremely hard thing to do. The half-life of omega-6 is somewhere around 2 years. So it can take people 2 to 4 years to get this out of their cells and get their metabolism fixed and back to normal. And it starts with completely avoiding seed oils, cutting back on nuts and seeds, and trying to eat more natural foods and not this ultra-processed food. It's basically the combination of sugar, grain, and vegetable oils. Okay, if you look at a cow, a grass-fed cow has an omega-6 to 3 ratio of about 3 to 1. Okay, and then they go and they feed it what to make it fat? They feed it grain, corn, and soybean, right? And so what it'll do is it'll get that up to about 8 to 1, and then it marbles that steak, okay? So if a cow eats their healthy whole grains and their corn and their soybean, what do you think happens to a human who eats their healthy whole grains with added corn oil and soybean oil, okay? Well, I'll tell you, it marbles them. And the majority of us are walking around looking like that marbled steak. And now you can kind of start to understand why we're all so sick and why we have arthritis and tendonitis, no energy, right? So my goal with my patients is to try to teach you to understand this and to get back to a normal human physiology. And I will continue to do more mini lecture series on these subjects and dive deeper in, but I'm just trying to get kind of a superficial series set up right now. So check back in. Thanks.